Welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Did you know that you actually have the option to either be a sugar burner or a fat burner? It's called having a metabolic advantage, as Dr. Ben Beekman would put it. You can actually burn your own stored body fat for fuel. On this show, we talk about ketogenesis, fasting, biohacking, all with the goal of optimal body composition for longevity and having the highest possible quality of life. I hope you enjoy these interviews and solo casts that I present to you, all with this goal in mind. Hey you guys, welcome back to Fast Keto. Thanks for being here. I'm so excited to share today's episode with you. If you are interested or curious to learn more about the carnivore diet, I have Scott Milzinski joining us. He is the host of the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet, and he interviews expert researchers, scientists, doctors, and regular N=1 people who've relieved a variety of different conditions with a carnivore or a ketogenic diet. Scott himself has been a carnivore for almost 3 years, and he uses the diet to improve his health and well-being. We geeked out today on all kinds of zero carb and carnivore related and keto topics, including how much protein should you eat, what the optimal amount of protein is versus fat, the way that he's evolved his keto and carnivore diet from when he first started 3 years ago to what it looks like now, some of the takeaways he's had from all the guests that he's interviewed and had on the shows, what were his best interviews and takeaways and ideas, and what he's learned the most from his guests. It was so much fun chatting with Scott and having him on the show today. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you do, let us know what your takeaways were. Share the episode with someone that you think might enjoy it, and leave me a rating or review. I would love to hear your thoughts on the podcast and always love hearing from you guys. I do this all for you, so I love to hear about what topics you're interested in and what I can feature and talk about on the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here tuning in and just here with me every week. I love sharing this information with you, these wonderful guests with you, cutting edge science on nutritional biochemistry with you, and it's just all great stuff. So sending you lots of love. Thanks for being here and tuning in, and I hope you guys enjoy the episode. All right, guys. Now, I know you're like me. You love to budget and save money, but also feed your families the most high quality, delicious tasting food that is super nutrient dense. Now that's why I love ButcherBox. They make all of this super affordable by taking out the middleman, grocery stores, and being able to purchase directly from a collective of ranches. This way we support buying high quality grass-fed and finished beef, free-range organic chicken that's free of antibiotics, heritage breed pork, wild-caught Alaskan sockeye salmon, all of this so affordably by being able to buy directly from the ranchers and fishermen. Now, ButcherBox is offering a very special deal for listeners of Fast Keto. If you go to butcherbox.com/fastketo, new members can receive 2 pounds of ground beef, 2 pounds of bacon for free, plus $20 off your first box just by going to butcherbox.com/fastketo. That's butcherbox.com/fastketo. Try them out. I absolutely love what they do and how affordable they make it to have grass-fed, grass-finished beef and such high quality foods shipped directly to your door, saving time and money from having to go to the grocery store, and just being able to provide really high quality, nutrient dense food for our families. So that's butcherbox.com/fastketo. Let me know if you try them out. They provide absolutely delicious meat. I love receiving my box every month, and I know that you will too. Welcome to Fast Keto, Scott. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Vanessa. I'm very excited to be here. Huge fan of your show. I've listened to practically every episode, and you've been a huge help for me in my carnivore and keto journey. So really excited to be sharing my story and chatting with you today.
Oh, that's so fantastic. Thank you so much for listening and to listening to so many of the episodes. I really appreciate knowing that. And I'm really excited to have you on the show. I love Carnivore Cast. It's one of my favorite podcasts. There's a few that I never miss, and really, really enjoy the content that you have and the guests that you have on. So for anyone who may not be familiar with your podcast, maybe you can tell us a little bit about it and your background and story.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for the kind words. That really means a lot. So the Carnivore Cast, I started last August. It's been almost a year now. Kind of crazy to think about. And I've done about 60 episodes. I'd say how my podcast is a little bit different is I try to have a healthy mix of folks who are keto and carnivore, but both from the research and expert sides, whether it's doctors, um, biochemical researchers like yourself, Vanessa, or experts on environmental impacts, such as Peter Baller said. I try to mix that with N=1 case studies. And a lot of times, the folks I have on my show have never been on a podcast before. Folks like Dr. Nevada Gray and an individual named Chris Donahue, who's lost over 200 pounds. And I try to showcase people who have used a carnivore or ketogenic diet to improve a wide variety of health conditions. And my aim with the podcast, it's a side hobby for me. I work full time in a corporate job and just spend about 5 hours a week on podcasting. My whole mission is just to make people rethink nutrition and question things. And I'm not trying to convert people or overly persuade them, but just open up their minds a little bit and give them an impression of what could be, and how they could improve their overall quality of life and the quality of life of their loved ones and friends around them by experimenting with some of these dietary choices. And if they want to dig more into the science, they can do that through the guests I have on my show or resources like the great ones you have through Ketogenic Girl. But really, my mission is just to kind of inspire and provoke a new way of thinking around diet for everyday folks who may have found the podcast through, a search for PCOS or a search for diverticulitis or whatever it may be. And then personally, I started the carnivore diet about 3 years ago. I was first inspired by Amber O'Hearn, who I know you've had on your show a few times. Brilliant, lovely lady I had the pleasure of meeting both at Keto Fest, most recently in Connecticut, and also at her Boulder Carnivore Conference. She's absolutely amazing. And I heard her on the Two Keto Dudes podcast talk about how plants are not only not necessarily essential, but could potentially be harmful. And I had already been eating a higher protein, meat-heavy ketogenic diet for a while, which I slowly built up to over the course of 4 or 5 years, going from paleo to low carb, kind of a primal approach, fasting, because I wanted to maintain my weight after coming out of kind of an extreme athletic background where I was rowing 2 to 3 hours a day competitively in university. I wanted to maintain my weight, maintain my health, improve some gut issues I had developed over time from poor dietary choices while I was an athlete, improve some joint problems, correct some muscle imbalances, and kind of just evolved removing things from my diet systematically in a very slow and painful process, but just felt better and better, moving along the spectrum from paleo to low carb to keto to carnivore. And since I've kept it up, and I'd say the changes for me have only been compounding over time. So, right off the bat, I had some initial weight loss and body composition changes, noticed more energy, better mood, better sleep. But over time, my digestion has cleared up a lot. I've had significant improvements in strength and endurance in the gym. And it's just made my life so much simpler and easier, and changed my relationship with food a lot, which I think is really significant.
That's so cool. I love hearing a little bit more about sort of your reasons behind, why you started getting into carnivore after, first finding keto, because for a lot of people, just doing keto, is such a game changer and really transformational. But then, there are some people who want to just like keep leveling up. Like what, well, keto did this for me. Like what if there's something unresolved, or if you just want to see like, well, what else, could this do? Or like you've seen with some guests you've had on your show that I loved, Matthew Cruz, who's just using it to help with his addiction and like other things. But yeah, it's interesting to see what like kind of spurred you on. Was this one thing? And I mean, you mentioned a few different things, but you were already doing keto. Like, was it hearing something Amber said, or there was just something that was unresolved for you that you just were like, I just want to get more results? Or
Yeah, and I would never say like keto is inferior to carnivore or low carb or paleo or whatever. If you're eating a certain way, it's working for you, and you don't have continuing medical conditions or problems. I would never try to persuade you to switch to carnivore or say what you're doing is wrong. For me, I was on a ketogenic diet where I felt like I was probably restricting my protein intake a little bit, and then foods like spinach, cheese, nuts were probably hurting me more than they were helping in terms of my gut issues, my energy. I was also combining a keto diet with kind of a lean gain style fasting where I would basically wake up and fast and have a cup of or two of coffee until lunchtime, eat a big meal at lunch, and then eat a big meal at dinner. And I think that combined with the fact that I was very low body mass for my height, I was very lean, and working in very stressful financial services jobs, 80, 90 hours a week, I was just jacking up my cortisol in all kinds of bad ways. And I think eating more meat was one step towards correcting that. But I think there were other changes I had, lifestyle and dietary changes I had to make to kind of relieve some of those things. And may have even been the switch to carnivore wasn't the biggest factor there. But I just felt so much better being able to eat kind of unlimited meat to satiety, and getting kind of the plants out of the picture just eliminated some of the noise around that.
yeah, that's really, really interesting. And I love how many incredibly intelligent people there are in the carnivore community. I have to say that, coming across some of Amber's work and Dr. Georgia Eid, you know, reading some of their blogs and the research that they were putting into this, was one of the factors that really drew me in when I was first researching into carnivore, even though the first time that I ever heard about it was through a friend of mine who's an author in the keto space. And she mentioned, and I told Ryan this when I saw him, Dr. Ryan Lowry was doing this like carnivore month. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, and I love how everyone always says, like, the first time they hear about it, they're just like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Because it does, it's so counterintuitive to so many things that we've been told about eating and nutrition.
Yeah, totally. I think everyone sort of has that reaction at first. But when you dig a little bit more into the science, it's not completely crazy. And I mean, the hardest part for some people is worrying about micronutrient deficiencies. And I think lots of people far smarter than myself have done a great job proving that animal foods can provide a lot of the nutrients you need without anti-nutrients and in highly bioavailable amounts. I think Maria Emmerich and Craig Emmerich have done such an excellent job with this.
Mm-hmm.
Amber, many others.
Yeah, one of the charts that Craig and Maria made and put in their book Keto, which has been circulated. I made a version of it myself, crediting them for putting it together. But they, you know, having that side by side, there's no graphic that I pull out in my phone more just to show people the power of meat-based nutrition, whether that's just, doing like a primal kind of diet or paleo or just anything that's meat-based, showing the nutrient availability and content that's in meat and just animal proteins, and how extraordinary it is when you start adding in organ meats. That chart that I'm referring to, it shows beef
Yeah,
liver versus, vegetables and some plants that are considered to be the most nutrient dense. And that one really makes you stop and go, wait a second.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a stigma, or narrative in our society that you need fruits and vegetables for nutrients. That's where you get all your nutrients. That's where you get all your vitamins. So I think that's almost one of the hardest myths to tackle.
What is one of the things that blew your mind the most of a guest that you had on the show?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, I could probably come up with a much more intelligent answer, but I think some of the stories just really move me. Like I said, there have been so many researchers and doctors who have said such incredibly intelligent things, but Dr. Nevada Gray's story of coming back from quadriceps equina syndrome and basically having spinal taps and multiple surgeries where she couldn't walk. Um, Brett Lloyd's overcoming, decades, 20 to 30 years of major depression, and not having a single day in his life where he felt actually happy. And then kind of flipping a switch after trying every pharmaceutical out there, CBD, all different kinds of treatments. Some of the things just almost sound like, snake oil is almost too good to be true. But I think the anecdotes can be really powerful. And when they add up, all it really tells me, for me, it's not sufficient evidence, but what it tells me is people should experiment, especially if they're in pain. People should be willing to experiment with something where there isn't significant downside from what we can see. Like we said, we're not going to get micronutrient deficiencies. And there's just so much upside. Like it can completely change your life just by trying keto or carnivore for 60 days, 90 days. And the way it has completely transformed some of these people's outlook on life when they had almost given up hope in some cases, that's really the most remarkable thing for me.
Yeah, I love how you say there's minimal downside risk, because it's hilarious to me that probably one of the biggest risks of doing carnivore is you might get too many nutrients. Like you might get too much vitamin A if you
Yeah.
too much liver. If you're doing nose to tail, like that's one of the side effects, is like you have to look at how much liver you're eating, because it's so nutrient dense that, there may be just some potential toxicity there. Like what other diet could you say that for? Like you have to be careful that you're going to get too many nutrients. Like that's just, I think that just says it all right there. But
Yeah.
I really love how you bring up the fact that it's not like you're out there trying to convince the world that this is the one way to eat or the best way to eat. It's just that if it's a powerful protocol for someone who has things that are unresolved. And like I love how, Dr. Paul Saladino, he always talks about how he was in great health, but he had this eczema thing, and it was like pointing to inflammation. It was like a marker, physical disturbance and marker that was showing him that there was something that just wasn't quite right. And then when he went carnivore, he had resolution for that. And I see a lot of people who, are extremely healthy in so many different ways, but then there's like this one thing that just drives them absolutely crazy, every day, or it's very like painful or difficult to manage. And this is like one potential protocol or option out there that's very powerful and, could potentially bring some resolution or some relief. It may not also, like it could also make things worse for a person. But like you said, the downside, is low. And I love how you talk about the anecdotes, because I think it's the stories of people that are so powerful and that are so inspiring, to hear. And I love that you feature a lot of those. I like to bring in stories on occasion too, because the episodes with experts and scientists and doctors are really interesting a lot of times because they've actually gone through similar experiences themselves, and then they have all this practical knowledge and hands-on experience. But someone who's just been like living a way that no one else does around them for 10 or 15 or 20 years, and I mean, what a story that is. Like it's just amazing, to hear from people like that who are brave enough to like go against the current and just do something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've had some really brilliant. I've had the pleasure of having some really brilliant people on the show, like Dr. Georgia Ede Amber, Siobhan Huggins, who have displayed both their own knowledge and deep research, which backs up a carnivore or ketogenic diet, as well as they can overlay their own personal experiences and anecdotes from working with clients. I think that's a wonderful mix as well.
I love coffee. I also love having mental sharpness, concentration, and clarity, and it's one of the main reasons that I do keto. So I've been really intrigued by some of these mushroom coffees out there and these adaptogens and wanting to try them out. So I first came across this company called Sigmatic. They make these mushroom coffees you've probably heard of, and they sent me some samples to try out, and I was really interested in the one with lion's mane and chaga because I came across some really cool studies. I'll put them in the show notes for you guys, showing the positive effects on concentration from lion's mane. It is so cool. So I've been trying them out for myself, and I'm going to be sharing and posting about some of my results over on Instagram and Facebook and sharing some of the results that I experienced. But there's a couple of really cool things I also like about them. They have about half the caffeine of a standard cup of coffee, so only about 50 milligrams of caffeine versus about 95 to 100. And the half-life of caffeine is quite long, so if you're wanting to reduce your caffeine consumption for better sleep, it's a great alternative for that. And another cool thing is if you travel a lot, you can take them, these little packs that have these adaptogens in them, with you on the road when you're traveling, and that makes it super convenient. So they are offering 15% off to any of my ketogenic girls and boys out there who want to try it out for themselves. You can go to foursigmatic.com/ketogenicgirl. That's foursigmatic.com/ketogenicgirl, or use the discount code ketogenicgirl at checkout and try them out. Let me know if you had an improvement in your concentration and focus, and if you like trying out adaptogens. I'd love to hear what you guys think of them. So head over to foursigmatic.com/ketogenicgirl and try them out today. Now, one of the episodes that I loved the most that you had, I mentioned earlier, Matthew Cruz episode, and I had him on Fast Keto talk a little bit less about his actual story because you guys did such a good job covering it on your show, and just a little bit more about the food addiction side. And one of the things I wanted to chat with you about was tyrosine and dopamine. I know you've had a lot of different guests on your show, but you also mentioned, I think maybe to me privately or in some other forums, that your dad had always mentioned tyrosine being something good to supplement with when someone, like for example, when Matthew was quitting coffee, you mentioned it to him. And I think maybe you were chatting with Amber about it at some point. And, you know, for me with like my dark chocolate, it's like the one thing that for me is like, it's my dopamine, like, you know, trigger. So I started researching more into tyrosine and seeing how it's very, you know, prevalent, high. There's very high levels of it in meat, you know, and in addition to all these other nutrients, but the precursors, you know, to make dopamine, being tyrosine, and there, you know, there's higher levels of that. But why did your dad always recommend it to you? Like, where did that come from, and how have you seen it be applied for people?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And like you said, there are these compounds that are found highly bioavailable in meat, like tyrosine, taurine is another one. Others like carnitine, these amino acids which can mediate different responses in our body and can affect neurochemicals. So L-tyrosine is an amino acid. It's found in the diet, mostly in meat. That's metabolized to produce ketocholamides, such as dopamine and adrenaline. And when you're chronically stressed or in a lot of stressful environments, basically L-tyrosine acts as this kind of safety buffer for anti-stress effects of these catecholamines, and sort of delays them being depleted. So, you know, if you're in a really stressful mental situation at work, or in the military in a combat situation, or you're sleep deprived, or in a stressful health situation, basically your dopamine and your adrenaline are being depleted, your noradrenaline. So L-tyrosine helps mediate those those issues. And this may be part of why people talk about kind of like the meat zen or zero carb zen or kind of meat calm they have after eating a big meat heavy meal. People often find their mood just feels very stable. And so I had originally heard about L-tyrosine when I was working in management consulting, working these 80 to 90 hour weeks, very stressful, lots of quote unquote fire drills, people yelling, crazy meetings, etc. And my father recommended, he's a big supplement nerd, he recommended supplementing with L-tyrosine because actually in the Air Force, in the military, when military personnel have to stay up for extended periods of time and are basically combating sleep deprivation, they commonly use L-tyrosine to help mediate some of those stressful effects. So I had heard about it through that and then did some research and also found out that when Amber O'Hearn was trying to quit coffee, she had used it to mediate kind of the withdrawal symptoms. And I believe I had suggested it to Robert Sykes, Keto Savage, when his now wife Crystal, was getting off caffeine for digestive issues. And I think I suggested it to you when you were talking about removing chocolate. And that's kind of the background on L-tyrosine.
Yeah, and I'm curious with, your thoughts on the needing to supplement it if someone is already, doing like carnivore and that kind of thing. You still think it can add like an added benefit even if someone's eating a lot of meat?
It's a great question. I'm not sure. It's not something I would take chronically, like every day. But I think if you are going through a period of increased stress, digestively or from your mood or work or something else in your life, or trying to remove something highly addictive from your diet, perhaps cessation of smoking or lowering your caffeine intake, I think it can be useful, partly because in a lot of the experiments where they've shown it can be helpful in sleep deprivation and cold stress and things like that, and improving your memory during stressful situations, because that's one of the first things to go when you're really stressed. You like almost can't recall things. They use relatively high doses, such as like up to 150 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, which is a lot. And getting that much through meat isn't super feasible. So I'd say the average person definitely doesn't need to take it. But if you know you're going to be going through this kind of stressful event, it could be a useful supplement just to kind of super compensate your levels. And there are drawbacks to taking L-tyrosine too. It can increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure, things like that. So I would definitely be careful with it and wouldn't say you need to take it all of the time.
Yeah, I know. I find it really interesting. So you've been doing carnivore now for 3 years. How has your carnivore changed, now compared to when you first started?
Yeah, great question. And I love to hear about this from folks too. For me, it started out as very basic kind of fatty ground conventional beef, and water and coffee, and a ton of salt. And I think I entered the carnivore diet before there was a lot of information out there. So this was fall of 2016. So it's before Sean Baker, well before Paul Saladino, before a lot of these folks had provided a lot of useful and helpful information on how to do carnivore effectively. There were the Facebook groups like Zeroing In on Health, Principia Carnivora, justmeat.co, the website, other resources out there. But I made some mistakes. Mainly, I was eating a lot of rendered fat, so tallow. So I would cook extra fatty ground beef in a pan, and I would just like save all the fat and eat all the fat. And Rob Wolf talks about this, and I think you've talked about it on your podcast too. And Judy Cho has talked about how 90% of people have low stomach acid, and especially coming from a place where we're not used to digesting a lot of fat, or animal fat specifically, it can be really hard for our bodies to break down high amounts of rendered animal fat. So I was having a lot of digestive issues. Mainly, I was basically holding a lot of my food in my stomach and getting very bloated, and then up late at night burping a lot, kind of like GERD-like symptoms. And that persisted for months, actually, probably 6 to 8 months of starting the carnivore diet. And I was just super stubborn and still had great energy, but it was affecting my sleep, it was affecting my digestion. I still felt all the benefits, but that was really painful. And looking back, I would have been a lot more careful with eating a lot of rendered fat. I would have been more careful with, possibly supplementing with some digestive enzymes or bile salts such as lipase, betaine. Um, there are other ones, ox bile, but I didn't, and I didn't know about these things. And I also didn't know that coffee, the acid in coffee, was still kind of affecting my digestion. So I kind of just pushed through it. That was kind of the first year. And then coming into the second year, those symptoms just started to subside naturally. And I also started eating, less ground beef, more steaks. I shifted my meal timing to earlier in the day, which really helps because basically by having a ton of coffee and delaying my fast into the day, I was letting cortisol levels continue to rise early in the day, and then eating big meals later in the day and at night, which I found affects my sleep because I'm still digesting, and a lot of my blood is kind of rushing to my gut, which inhibits deep sleep at night. So I shifted my meal timing earlier. That was another major change I made. And then more recently, in kind of my third year, I started really focusing on, thanks to great information from you and Paul Saladino and others, focusing on more nutrient dense foods. And, initially I had some pushback against this. I was kind of in the Sean Baker camp of, I don't have any clear nutrient deficiencies, I feel fine. But really, nutrient density is something where it's a great insurance policy. I feel good when I eat those foods. I feel better when I eat them. I have more energy. I have better sleep. I have clearer cognition. And also, it's not like the majority of my diet. Like the difference between a nutrient poor and nutrient rich carnivore diet, in my mind, or ketogenic diet, is just having, a few more eggs a week, having some form of seafood here and there, maybe some oysters, and maybe having liver once or twice a week in small portions. It's not like it's really around the last 10% of the diet. It's not changing 50% of your diet. And that has actually made a substantial difference for me. At first, I didn't notice many effects, but it has helped a lot, I believe. And then most recently, over the past 3 to 6 months, I have tinkered more with kind of fat to protein ratios and found some interesting things there that work better for me.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So what are your latest conclusions there?
Yeah. I think this is kind of the hot topic in the carnivore community, and I've had guests far smarter than me on to talk about it, like Paul Saladino, Sean Baker, yourself, many others. And I think both sides of the story make theoretical sense to me, biochemical sense to me, and also people have anecdotes on both sides. People saying they can lose fat more easily with higher fat when they're not, spiking their insulin with protein and potentially raising their blood sugar over time and relying more on gluconeogenesis. People in the higher protein camp saying, oh, your body just uses protein in the amount it needs, and eating too much fat will make you gain more weight. It's excess calories. I have found, like, my conclusion after all of this is kind of they're both right. And, the Ted Naiman side of just saying, like, you want your body to go through gluconeogenesis also makes sense. I would say everyone should just do kind of, once you're stable on carnivore, you've done it for 3 to 6 months, you should spend 2 weeks trying each extreme. Trying, limiting your meat to 1 to 1.5 pounds a day and supplementing with fat until you're full. Do that for a week or 2 weeks rather, and then try the opposite. Try eating, 2 to 3 pounds of meat a day, somewhat fattier cuts, but not adding fat to it, and just see how you fare on both of those. And I think you'll find out pretty quickly. For myself, on the higher fat, I feel really good. My energy is good. I think my cognition is clearer. But even if I'm eating, 2 pounds of meat, which for me, 165-pound male, that's like at least 160 grams of protein. I'm still really hungry and find I have to go to extremes to get enough fat in. And then I still have trouble kind of digesting that fat, even if I'm very careful with it, using things like beef suet and solid fats rather than rendered fats, or ghee, or certain fattier cuts of meat. Um, so I always kind of default back to eating, two and a half to 3.5 pounds of meat a day, not trying to eat a lot of extra rendered fat, not adding fat to my meats, but kind of prioritizing higher fat foods like ribeye steaks, porterhouse steaks, eggs, etc. But I always find that when I try to really up the fat, I'll get some of those symptoms I had in the first year, like a grumbling, upset stomach at night, and starting the burping, and just not really feeling optimal. I think there are other people who will find the opposite. They feel just like great, better energy, easier digestion with the less protein. But I think our body has pretty clear feedback mechanisms. If you're like some people, you'll try the higher fat and you'll be rushing to the bathroom. And if you're like other people, you'll try the higher protein. And Michaela Peterson talked about this with your recent podcast. She talks about it a lot. She just gets mood upset when she's high protein, somewhat lower fat, even moderate fat, and hangry a lot between meals, and kind of signs of spiking and decreasing blood sugar, which I think is a clear sign that your body isn't dealing with that protein kind of totally properly. But I'm curious if that kind of jives with how you think about it.
Yeah, I think that it also, there's probably a couple factors. I think it's interesting how people get results with both, and how I think one of the factors may be the person's overall health, status. Like Paleo Medicina, their protocol is really high fat. And I think that that's because what they're going for is optimal healing and, restoring all the basic, functional material that the body needs. And so much of that comes from fat, and it's less about, satiety or, building muscle or whatever. It's more just about like healing. And when you look at how much of the body is made up of fat, I mean, we're made out of protein and fat, like everything, in our bodies is either protein and fat. It's not really carbs. Like there are some, glycolipids and there are some, carbs in the body, but it's mostly protein and fat, like vast majority. So I think it might depend on like where the person is at in terms of like, especially for women tend to minimize protein more than men, just from lifestyle and culture. I know for myself, like the only time that I used to ever feel super full from meat was like at Thanksgiving. It was like, that was like the only time that I really overate on meat because everyone else was doing it, and now like from eating and emphasizing meat more, I feel that kind of like Thanksgiving full, not uncomfortably, but just that same level of like, whoa, like I'm good.
Yeah.
I feel that much more often. And I think just as women, I notice this because I go to like all these steakhouses and stuff now. And I talk to other women who live a similar lifestyle, and they're like, there's no men in there. Like, it's just like, you're like the only woman when you go to these places. So I think with women too, hormonally, there's like sometimes having a higher ratio of fat can be preferable. But then what I have noticed just from observing a lot of these like carnivore groups and things that you mentioned yourself is that it tends to be really helpful when the emphasis at the beginning is like healing the body, restoring it to homeostasis, providing all those building blocks and things. And then afterwards, sort of more tweaking and finding what that individual sweet spot is for yourself, like you said. And the only way you can get there, as you said yourself, is by testing it and trying it. Like it's the only way you're going to know how it works specifically for you, because biologically we're very similar, but then you have no idea what your own body is like, if it could be deficient in serotonin, or is it deficient in chylomicrons, or whatever it is that you need more of, you know.
Yeah.
But what's amazing is the body's so brilliant that as long as you just give it, the best nutrition that you can find, it will find that homeostasis for you for the most part. One other point I think is interesting is that with nutrient density, food is much smaller. And I think with carnivore, one of the things that might be difficult is like adjusting to smaller portions and realizing that smaller portions will still satisfy you, but there's a delay in the consumption of it versus how long it takes for the satisfaction. So if, especially I know like women, I'm a woman, so I'm like tending to bring this up, but we tend to be more volume eaters. A lot of men are too. And we're trained to like eat these giant salads all the time and stuff. And so then when you go from like eating this massive voluminous bowls of salad to like a small piece of meat with some like liver pate or, sardines or something, it's not always as big just because it's more dense. You're still getting so many nutrients and stuff, but then I think that maybe some people, when going, even it's the same thing for keto, I see similar things with that, is like trying to have these huge plates and fill up all this volume and having a really hard time letting go of those voluminous foods because they give us this sense of, fullness, even if it's like uncomfortable fullness or distension or whatever, bloating, like it's like I'm full because you don't know what actual fullness from nutrient satiety is. You instead just rely on that stomach stretch of like, I'm going to put as much in there as possible and then I'll be full, which is unfortunately what happens when our diet is mostly like not that nutrient dense. So there's a lot of different things I know I mentioned there. But I
love that point, Vanessa. Sorry to interrupt. It took me personally a long time to overcome that. I think my first year or so of carnivore, I was still chasing that stomach stretch fullness.
mm-hmm.
And it's only more recently that I felt satisfied eating slightly smaller portions and being able to say like, hey, I'm good on food right now.
Mm-hmm.
My stomach doesn't feel stretched. My stomach doesn't feel full. I'm not restricting myself, but I'm satisfied with that meal, and I don't need to put more bites in my mouth because I'm losing my taste for meat for now. And then it sort of rebuilds over the day.
Hey guys, just taking a really quick break to talk about the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. If you're interested in doing a ketogenic diet for yourself, it's a great place to start. I teach you everything about how to follow a keto diet to get yourself into nutritional ketosis, and it includes 28 days of meal plans. It comes with weekly shopping lists, how to interpret results, how to test yourself, a complete guide to getting started on keto. If you've been keto for a while and you're just not getting the results that you want to in terms of your health or fat loss, or you are brand new to keto, the 28-day challenge is a great option because it also comes with my free coaching and support in our members Facebook group, and you can post any questions that you have about the meal plans, about keto, and I am there supporting you. We have an amazing community in our group. I like to call it the happiest place on earth because everybody in there is so excited about following keto, about having found something that really works well for them. And everyone in there is just so kind, caring, generous, and supportive. And it's a really fun place to be and hang out. So if you'd like more info on it, you can find it at ketogenicgirl.com, and it's the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. It is interesting how there is a delay because, as you all know, it takes the body so much more time to break down protein and fat than it does with carbohydrates. So people feel an instant shift whenever they eat fast absorbing carbs, whereas the fat and protein, especially protein, like 30% of the caloric value in it is lost just in breaking it down because it takes a lot of work for the body to break protein down into individual amino acids. So as opposed to glucose, which is so quick. So it might take like 15 or 20 minutes more for the body to feel like, okay, I've reached that nutrition. But, a lot of times, like, we're not done eating, like the meal will start and you're kind of done your plate, but then you don't necessarily always feel full right away. And I think that might be one factor in people who do keto or zero carb, both, and feel like, oh, I'm still hungry, or I don't feel satisfied from these meals, or they're like gaining weight, they're not getting the results that they want because they're not feeling satisfied from that meal, and then adding more to compensate. And like you said, it's a real readjustment in terms of looking at nutrient density, because it is dense. It's just portions. I was looking at some old podcast episode I did say, and one of them was just on portion control, and I was talking about this topic and how you have to like reimagine what a plate is and what a size is when you are dealing with fat and protein, because it's, especially fat, it's more than twice the caloric value per gram than carbohydrates. Everything is going to look smaller, but it doesn't mean that you're getting less. Actually, you're getting
Yeah.
more nutrients and all that.
And I think something that I believe it was in that episode you emphasized, Vanessa, or you talked about before, I think something missing from carnivore, which I've noticed more in kind of the if it fits your macros, flexible dieting type crowd, which I still pay attention to and listen to podcasts about just because I find it fascinating. And I think there's things we can all learn from each other. They focus more on mindful eating. And I think that's so important for digestion, satisfaction, fullness, well-being, stress, is doing things like not listening to a podcast or watching a video every time you eat something, not eating over your laptop, taking a deep breath before you eat, paying attention to your food, the sensation of chewing and smelling. I think that can make such a huge difference in how we feel about our meals. And it gets kind of silly sometimes, but also things like, filling up your plate and taking it down to sit rather than eating out of a container, choosing how much food you're going to eat ahead of time, things like this. It's not, I'm not talking about like playing mental tricks on yourself and trying to make yourself think you're eating way more than you are, but just kind of being present with your food, I think, is something that's really powerful. And people almost ignore in the carnivore community. It's like, yep, take your ribeye steak, wolf it down and go, see how fast you can eat it. But I think there's something missing there, and we can just absorb a lot more of our food and nutrients, if nothing else, when we pay a little bit more attention.
Yes, I love that. I got advice from a nutritionist a long time ago who said, when you eat, don't watch anything, put away your phone, like just be present for that meal. And I love that you brought that up, because I try to do that whenever I eat, and just like be present for the food you're receiving, and being thankful and all that. That's a really great point. Now, I love how you emphasize nose to tail a lot in your approach. I love when you post about the oysters. We were at this all-you-can-eat meat plates the other night, and I was like loading up on oysters. So tell us what nose to tail is for anyone who isn't really familiar with the topic, and why is it important to emphasize for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll caveat this by saying I haven't eaten any noses or tails ever. So it's kind of a funny term, but for me, it just means including more parts of the animal than just the muscles that 90% of society kind of eats today, at least in the Western world. So for instance, a really simple meal kind of template, if you will, that I often use is just a piece of meat, a pound of meat plus something nutrient dense on the side. So that could be very conveniently some boiled oysters soaked in water that I bought on Amazon. Probably not the most nutrient dense way to get oysters, but really easy and convenient. It could be a few egg yolks or eggs, pasture raised on the side to get some of the rich vitamins such as choline that are present in eggs that you don't get as much in meat. It could be having some salmon roe to get the phospholipid form of omega-3s and those healthy fatty acids that people are trying to get by taking fish oil pills, maybe in a better, less oxidized form. And it often includes liver. I think liver is the most essential of all those things because it's high in things like vitamin A, high in things like copper, which we don't get traditionally in muscle meat, and it can balance out some of the nutrients that are very high in muscle meat. So, meat is very high in zinc. Zinc to copper ratio is something that people believe to be important. And if you're only eating muscle meat, you're not getting sufficient copper to kind of balance that out. And, it's other things like iodine, trying to experiment with different types of salts, trying to make sure you're getting potassium in. There's all different types of kind of nutrients that you can get in just by adding small amounts of these foods. You don't even have to do it every single day, but I just kind of try to think of it on a weekly basis, seeing if I can get roughly a half pound of liver on average a week. Roughly, before it was like 6 eggs a week. More recently, I've been trying to have like 2 or 3 eggs a day, just because I feel better with that. And it makes it adds a little bit of variety. It's enjoyable. And there are very cheap and easy preparation ways to do it. You don't have to make complex recipes or make it a lot harder.
That's really cool. Yeah, I love that it's basically what helps me to understand it is just thinking of it like the whole animal, the whole organism, and eggs are such a great representation of that because it's basically just one whole food. And, you can do that too with like salmon roe, fish eggs, oysters. It's just like a whole organism. It's hard to do that with like larger animals, but the organ meats, I think, are surprisingly delicious when approached in certain forms. Like I know you and I were talking about how your fiance loves the liverwurst too.
Yeah.
I recently tried that when I was in Denver. So my husband's cousin had some, and it was so good. There are definitely different forms and ways of having like liverwurst or liver pate or, oysters or, pick your way of getting it in. Sometimes for me, that's like sardines, it's pretty much the whole fish. Like you even get some bones in there, which like people are afraid of, but there's so much calcium in that. That there's really high calcium levels in like canned wild salmon and sardines because you do get some like cartilage in there and sort of more of the whole organism.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are scared initially of organs or have a distaste for them. And I certainly did. My taste actually changed, which was the most surprising thing to me. I even found the smell of liver completely repugnant. But I think there are ways to slowly introduce them. Your chicken liver pate recipe is an awesome way to do that. I think you can also play tricks like I do with my fiance by kind of cooking liverwurst in bacon, adding a lot of or in bacon fat, excuse me, adding a lot of spices. We recently bought a meat grinder, which has been awesome. Kind of grinding liver and ground beef together, and then adding some spices makes it a lot more palatable. So there's kind of tricks where you can get around the distaste for liver. I think a lot of people have a notion in their mind of liver as dirty and stigmas against it, and they've also had liver that's overcooked and like really tough and kind of chewy, nasty smelling. So I think people, if they experiment and find a way that they like it and can eat it at least for some time, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to note that liver, I believed for so many years when I was a vegetarian that liver is where the body stores all its toxins, but it's not. It's where it neutralizes toxins, and then your body usually stores them in fat or excretes them. So that's why they're so incredibly nutrient dense. Did you get an electric grinder or like a hand?
Yeah, so I'm actually getting married in exactly 1 month, and we put an electric grinder on our wedding registry.
Awesome. Yeah, when I was at KetoCon, one of the receptions we went to, they had like a organ meat, kind of ground beef, like chili kind of thing. And I was like, this is an awesome way for me to do beef liver because I just don't really like the texture of it cooked. So I've been eyeing up some different grinders on there. And you know what I find really interesting is my food is starting to look more and more like dog food. And I'm like, why are we giving all of this nutrient density and all these organ meats and all these parts to our pets? And, sometimes I'll be in the store and the only place I can find liver is like in the dog food, section. And we talk about, I'm not buying it from there, but that's the only thing that the store has. And I just find it really interesting that I've heard stories that we used to really emphasize and prize the organs and we would give away the muscle meat to our pets. And now it's the opposite. And I just find it interesting. Sometimes like I'll be having pate or like a jar of cold, brisket beef with like lard in it. And I'm like, this kind of looks like, animal food. I'm like, why did we lose that perspective? Like, I don't understand where we got so lost on that. I don't know if you have any theories on that or any of the guests on it.
That's super interesting. I think it had something to do with fear of parasites and quality of the meat, and kind of when we had lower standards in this country and other countries for how we process and distributed our meat, people kind of thought organs were the lowest quality and the most susceptible to those things, which is somewhat true, but meat quality standards have improved a lot. And there are also false perceptions, like you say, about livers storing toxins, which isn't true. To build on your point of pets, Travis Einerston is a vet who was on Human Performance Outliers, and I thought it's so interesting him talking about all these cats he's gotten off of basically resolve their diabetes. All he does all day long is relieve type 2 diabetes for cats. And all he has to do is get them on the like conventional liver and high protein, zero carb pet food. And it's actually super readily available for cats.
Oh my gosh.
Everywhere in the store, it's like the name brand Purina or like Frisky, I forget what it's called. Pet food is like the perfect cat food, but like it doesn't exist for dogs. It doesn't exist for humans. So I agree. It's somewhat ironic.
It is. Yeah, it's very ironic and very interesting. I'm glad you emphasize nutrient density a lot. And yeah, what are you most curious about right now, like in the nutrition and health space?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'm interested a lot selfishly in kind of gut healing, and finding ways to resolve some of my problems, finding ways where I can digest more fat. So one thing I didn't mention on the nutrient density is I've been emphasizing bone broth and collagen a lot. A lot of that is thanks to you and your great work and you talking about it a lot. And also Nutrition with Judy, at Nutrition with Judy, Judy Cho, talks about the importance of collagen. She's a nutritional therapist in gut health. So that's something I'm really looking into more and passionate about and emphasizing in my own diet. The other thing I'm curious about is kind of just athletic performance. So I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but coming out of chronic rowing, lightweight rowing, and cutting weight, I was severely under-muscled for my body size. So I'm passionate about building lean mass. I think that's incredibly important for men and women. Dr. Gabriel Lyon talks about muscle as the organ of longevity. And, when people get sick at the end of life and have diseases or they break a hip, muscle is really what keeps them hanging on. And there's a direct correlation between higher muscle mass and longer longevity and lower mortality. It's been proven time and time again. So I'm always interested in, how well a carnivore diet is helping people build muscle, and if there are ways we need to supplement around it, or, most interesting lately has been folks like Danny Vega doing these kind of like targeted carnivore diets where they put in some carbs before a workout to have kind of an insulin spike and some of that extra glucose available for lifting weights. And I can see a lot of pros and cons of doing that. So that's something I'm kind of doing some experiments with myself.
Well, I hope you post about them and tag me, because that'll be awesome. What advice do you have for someone who is in our space and is really fired up and inspired and wants to start a podcast?
Yeah, I'd say definitely go for it. I was super reluctant to, because there were podcasts like yours, Vanessa, and Two Keto Dudes and Human Performance Outliers. And I kept saying to myself, oh, they have all the guests on who I'd ever want to have. They've touched on the topics I want to touch on. I'm binge listening to these podcasts. Why do we need another one? And I think, hopefully what I've done has been helpful to some people. And I think everyone has kind of a story to share. And it's also just a great way to start connecting with people. And even if the information I'm sharing or you choose to start a podcast and are sharing isn't necessarily new or groundbreaking, it may touch someone new in some way. They may find it through a coworker or a friend or family member. And it may have a chance to change their life in a positive way, even if it's not, health and nutrition. It could be anything. So I'd say, do the bare minimum to get started. Get the basic audio recording equipment, nothing fancy, and don't put up high hurdles for yourself. Try to do it without a YouTube channel, without a website, without a bunch of social media accounts. Just try to get a few episodes out there and then slowly build it over time. I think too many people with everything in life, and I'm guilty of this, it's just the getting started, which is hard. So I basically said, I'm going to do, 6 episodes. I think Tim Ferriss did this, and, evaluate from there. And I made that commitment, and I got 6 episodes out in the first month. And that's kind of just, I loved it, and it built on itself from there.
That's awesome. That's great advice. And it sounds like my motto, which is done is better than perfect.
Yes, that's a great motto. I love that.
Yeah, it's really easy to, just delay things because you want them to look amazing or sound absolutely perfect, but it's way more important to just get something out there. So I love that that's been your approach. Now, where can people look out for more from you? I definitely would love to have you back on the show again. I feel like there's so many more things it would be great to chat with you about, and I really appreciate you taking the time. But until then, where can people listen to your podcast and find you on social media? Where do you like to hang out?
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. It's been a real pleasure being on. Like I said, I absolutely love your show, and it's surreal getting to be a guest. So thanks again. My podcast is the Carnivore Cast. You can just search Carnivore in your favorite podcast player, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, whatever you choose to use, Spotify. And my website is carnivorecast.com. I'm also on Instagram is where I'm most active, Twitter, Facebook, just search Carnivore Cast. And I love to hear from people. Shoot me an email, shoot me a direct message. I'm happy to help.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Scott. It really was a pleasure having you on, and thank you for all that you're doing to share awareness about carnivore and just nutrition and meat-based nutrition, because it's really helpful, and always having great guests on your show and letting your guests do a lot of the talking, which is hard to do when you're passionate about a topic, but I think you do a really good job at that.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
All right, friends, thank you so much for being here and listening to today's episode of Fast Keto. I had such a great time sharing part of my day with you. I hope you did as well. If you are interested in trying keto with me as your personal coach and guide to try out keto or to tweak your keto, or if you've been doing keto for a while and you're just not getting the results that you want to get, I'm here to help you. I've made all the mistakes. I've learned all the things. I have worked with thousands of people on keto with the meal plans that I have at ketogenicgirl.com. I have made all the mistakes that you could possibly make when it comes to keto so that I could learn and save you time and money trying to figure it out and stumble around in the dark. I can turn the lights on for you and show you exactly how to do keto, portion control, with shopping lists, with all the major learnings and takeaways that I've had over the years of studying this way of life and making it effective for myself and for so many other people. So I would love to have you join the program. If you want to go to ketogenicgirl.com, you can check it out there. The original 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge is the one that I've had the most success and results with for most people trying out keto or even doing keto for a while and getting stalled out or just not seeing the results that a person wants to see. Check that out and feel free to send me any questions over on Instagram or on Facebook at the Ketogenic Girl official Facebook page. I'm there all the time just answering questions about the program and coaching people. So I would love to have you join. Until the next episode, I hope that you have a fat-filled rest of your day and sending you lots of love. A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with the ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown, so you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian.